You want to know if you should be reading fiction or non-fiction books. Which is better? What makes a book worth reading? And how do you choose the correct book for you? Now, I really do think fiction books and non-fiction books, or just really any self-help books, they all have their place and time in our lives. But I really just wanted to talk about why I think fiction books are generally more better for you overall. So to start off with, fiction books are generally more enjoyable. In general, it's much easier to pick up any fiction books because you like the story, you like the back of the book, maybe you really like the author, maybe you've read a couple other books by this author, you know you like the genre, so it's much easier to pick out a fiction book in comparison to a non-fiction book. And obviously there's also a lot of options when it comes to self-help books, but I generally do think it is much more enjoyable to be reading fiction books, and I think there's something powerful with reading fiction because you are actually learning a lot about yourself while you are reading fiction books, and it is just so much more enjoyable to pick up a fiction book and read about a story, read about a character, get this whole development. I know there are self-help books that does that, like they build on a story, and I think that's great, but in general I feel like I pick up fiction books because I generally just want to read this book, and I'm not reading this because, oh, I need to improve on this area in my life. Like, it is way more enjoyable. Like, I pick up fiction books because I want to enjoy reading now, and then self-help books are way more for I want to learn and not really for just the enjoyment of reading overall. And I also generally do believe with fiction books, it is so much easier because you can pick from every single category, and by this I mean like you can pick up an easy book by someone like Colin Hoover, you can pick up a classic literature, you can pick up whatever it is, like whatever reading level you want to read at. You can choose a random ass romance book that just follows a simple plot, or you can follow a long ass book series that has a lot of depth and character and a lot of story, so you can really just pick and choose. Then I also do believe every single fiction book and every single book genre is worth your reading time. Obviously we all have our favorites. For example, with me, when I first started out reading, I was really into romance books because generally they are just easier to read, and then I started adventuring into like dystopian books, and then into like any book really that's just like a little bit more difficult to read, if that makes sense, because generally romance books just follow a very simple plot and that's really it. And I especially believe if you are reading a more in-depth book like a classic literature, you are generally learning so many things from this book in comparison to a self-help book where you're really just reading about a certain topic or a certain person, and while it might be super interesting, you don't have to read every single self-help book out there just because somebody told you had to read that specific self-help book. Because, for example, I really enjoy Atomic Habits by James Clear. I think the book was great and I think I learned a lot of things from it, but to be honest, I don't really implement that many things said in the book, and I've generally found myself becoming a better me from reading fiction books in comparison to self-help books. Most of the time I don't really feel like I actually pick up the information in the self-help books, and that kind of ruins the point of the non-fiction books. And reading fiction makes us more empathetic. To be honest, as I said, you learn more about yourself when you are reading fiction books because it is so beautiful when you read about a character you can relate to, like maybe they kind of look like you, or you really relate to the things they struggle with or they're currently struggling with, and the whole story, maybe you relate to that, in comparison to if you're reading a book about, I don't even know, Steve Jobs or something. Like, you don't relate to Steve Jobs. I mean, interesting guy, but like, you know, it's much more enjoyable, and obviously we become more empathetic when we are reading fiction books because we are actually reading about human beings. Obviously it's fiction, it's not real, but the things that happens in fiction books are usually realistic unless it's obviously a fantasy book. You can relate a lot more to the story and characters, and I really do believe if you want to read self-help books, you have to pick from specific areas of your life you want to improve on or things you want to learn. Because you should not pick up a self-help book just because some random person on the internet told you to read it. Just because I say I like Atomic Habits doesn't mean you have to read it. I don't care. And to set an example for this, I cannot think of a single book, but something I would personally want to improve on is like maybe my relationship with myself and my relationship with others. I would not pick up a book about medicine or productivity or anything like that because it doesn't make sense for what I actually want to improve on in my life. But for some people, they may really want to read a book about neuroscience or anything medical because maybe they are a medical student or they just think the subject is really interesting. But with any self-help book, you should really only pick up books that you really want to improve on in your overall life or something you generally want to learn about. And I also do think if there are books you don't actually want to commit to the whole book, you can definitely use websites where you can read summaries about the book. I can't remember any websites right now, but I know there are some websites you can go on that will give you summaries of it and just like the general plot, and then you can actually learn from the book because you're just getting the actual most important parts of the book instead of reading it all and maybe missing the important parts of the book. You can actually read a lot of self-help books without actually having to read all the self-help books. You know, both non-fiction and fiction books have their time and place to exist in your life. Depending on who you are, maybe you want to read a ton of self-help books and that's all you're interested in and you just want to read like that. That's actually how I started out with reading. I was reading a couple of self-help books and then I discovered I actually wanted to read fiction books. So it really just depends on who you are as a person because a lot of people will benefit from only reading fiction books and other people will really benefit from reading non-fiction books as self-help books. But I also generally advise that you should be having both fiction and non-fiction books because they're both beautiful, but I generally think you are just better off with fiction books in general for more pleasure. I would say have your fiction books for pleasure when you just want to read, and then you have your non-fiction book when you actually want to study or work or you know, like it's still pleasurable because you really enjoy reading, but you're just reading this fiction book, because you're still reading this non-fiction book to help on a certain area of your life. So that's gonna be it for today's video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, maybe you want to check out this other video I made about how I really enjoy reading on my Kindle and why I exclusively read on my Kindle. Maybe, who knows? If you liked the video, please hit the like button and comment down below what you thought of the video, and if you want to see more of my beautiful face, maybe you also subscribe. Please remember to be kind to yourself and others, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!